Okay, we are live with Alexander Mercuris, and we have with us once again on the Duran, Alex Krainer. Alex, how are you doing today?
I'm doing really well. Good to be with you, gentlemen, again, and greetings to all the viewers and listeners.
And where is the best place for people to follow your work, Alex?
Probably on X. My handle is at Naked Hedgie, and I also have a Substack, Alex Krainer's Trend Compass.
All right, I have those links in the description box down below, and I will add those links as a pinned comment when the live stream is over. So, Alex, and Alex, or Alex, and Alexander, let's get talking about what is going on in the world, what is happening in Europe, the economic situation in Europe, Brics, and other interesting topics that we can discuss with Alex. Before we get started, let me just say a quick hello to everyone that's watching us on Rockfin, on Odyssey, on Rumble, on YouTube, and on our locals channel, the Duran.locals.com. And a big shout out to our moderators in the chat as well. We have Zariel in the house today, the great Zariel. And I also think I saw the great Peter as well. Peter the Great was also in the chat helping to moderate. So Alexander, Alex, let's get going.
Let's indeed, because of course we're in a period of great change, tremendous change that is going to be epochal. And there's nobody better to discuss it with than Alex Krainer, who follows these events with incredible care. And I'm going to suggest that what we're going to be talking about today, when people go back and study these times, they're going to agree that these were the most important events of all. If you dialed back, went to the world of 1944, in the summer of 1944, all sorts of battles were taking place in all kinds of places, in France, in Poland and Russia, and all of these places. And of course, those battles were hugely important. But the creation of a world global and financial architecture at a small place called Bretton Woods, that I think many people today understand was one of the most important things that took place at that time of all. And I think we're in exactly that same situation. And it's interesting because whereas the Bretton Woods system was created consensually with all of the victorious powers, including, by the way, the Russians, agreeing to it, this is not the same this time. This time, the transition is contested. And there is that tiresome quote of Gramsci's that everybody comes up with, but which I think is true, where he once said that the crisis lies in the fact that the old world is dying, but the new cannot be born. And in fact, we are exactly that situation. We are seeing the dying of the old world, but the new world has not yet been born. So we're not yet in that situation where we can see how things will turn out. And that's creating instability and uncertainty and a certain amount of fear. And I saw in the media here in Britain last week a real good example of that fear because as everybody knows who follows our programs, the presidents of Russia and Iran had a meeting in Ashgabat in Turkmenistan. And they mentioned and they discussed the fact that they are due to attend again a Brics summit meeting in 2 weeks' time. And the media in Britain covered that meeting in Ashgabat. And then they mentioned the fact that these two presidents will meet again. And they didn't mention the fact that they were going to meet again in a Brics summit meeting. The word Brics was obviously not permissible by the editors. They were clearly told, don't mention the format, the venue where these two presidents are going to meet again in 2 weeks' time. So where are we? We are in a situation where Bloomberg is now talking about a deep crisis in Europe, where everybody can see this deepening. economic crisis in Europe. We have article after article appearing in Britain talking about the difficulty of getting growth to come back to the British economy. Everybody can in fact see that there is economic stagnation and decay in Britain. But alongside that, we have this decisive change in the world that's coming, the new world that's coming. So, Alex, tell us about that. Firstly, do you agree with me that this is an epochal time? An epochal
Yes,
time.
I absolutely do agree with you. I think that we're coming to a turning point in history that's breaking with continuity, which depends on how you wish to cut it. We could call it of the last 5 centuries, or we could call it of the last 25 centuries. And I think that let's look at the very obvious but very important thing that we have today, which no generation before us had, is the internet. So the first time ever we have orders of magnitudes increased access to information and knowledge. And so this is a blessing of the whole humanity. It's practically accessible to everybody, and you can see the effect, and you can see also the empire's equestrian class throwing tantrums more and more often about how difficult it is to govern, how difficult it is to control the narrative. We saw Alex Karp in May this year complain that if we lose the intellectual battle, we will not be able to deploy any Western army anywhere in the world. And they wouldn't be throwing these tantrums if it wasn't a problem for them. It clearly is a problem. And that means that they have difficulty maintaining their order. And, I think that the best visual for this, for people to try to envision what this looks like is simply to envision old structures of society falling to ruins and new things growing from the ground up, like, in an organic way. Isaac Newton said that if he could see farther, is because he was able to stand on the shoulders of giants. What we have today is not just that we have the ability to stand on the shoulders of giants. We are collectively all climbing on top of each other, using each other's research, insight, knowledge, experience, sharing it. And, every so often you come across something that you never knew anything about. And now suddenly it's there in front of you in its fullness because somebody has spent 20 or 30 years of their life looking deeply into something, and then they just deliver it in a podcast or in an article or in a documentary film. And it's clearly the internet and this dynamic of exchange of knowledge and information is clearly a variable in the equation that never existed before. So we are off the charts of everything we knew in history. All the history that's been taught to us, as distorted as it was, the reality today is taking new turns. We don't know what those turns are because we've never been here. But I would say that I'm very positive and very optimistic about it, because I think that we're, rather than deferring to authority, and say like, oh, well, this is like this because this great authority says it is so. We are becoming judges of what's real and what's not real, and what's true and what's not true ourselves individually. And, as insofar as many people have a very dim view of individual human intelligence and awareness and level of education and so on, you come across that every time people are frustrated. Oh, how can't everybody see this? Is everybody so stupid? But I think that we all come to our enlightenment in our own time. It's slow. It's a process that takes time. everybody has different interests, so they will focus their attention to different things at different times. And then I also believe that there's a lot of very compelling evidence that we are a species designed for collective wisdom, for collective intelligence. And in that respect, I think we get to extremely fascinating things. And what we can observe already now is that in some mysterious way, we have steered away from certain very bad outcomes, some very bad projects and agenda. For example, the health emergency that we had a few years ago, which was supposed to usher us into a new normal. We were supposed to go around with certain permits and certificates that would allow us to get on a train, to get on a plane, to get in a restaurant, and so on. And we were promised that this is the new normal, that the old normal, it was never coming back. Well, we're in the old normal back again somehow, and we saw these measures fall in one country after the next. Famously in French Parliament in July 2022, when the pass sanitaire was supposed to be renewed. It wasn't, and the people in power were absolutely vexed about it. But we steered away from that dystopian future. How, it's a mystery to me, but it is why I am almost incurably optimistic about what's going on, in spite of all the ugly stuff that's going on.
Let's start with the old world, which is I think a point I would make is that, of course, what we think of economically as the old world, Europe, the United States, in economic terms, in terms of economics, when I was born in 1961, it was the world. I mean, when people talked about the world economy in the 60s, as I remember it, I was just on the cusp of my memory. Everybody thought of Europe and the United States. There was some things going on in Japan. The Soviet Union was up to its own things, which nobody quite really understood what they were. But overall, in terms of world trade, in terms of economics, industry, technology, science, culture, everything was concentrated on Europe and on the United States. And nobody thought beyond that at all. Now, of course, suddenly we find that we're just a part of a much wider economic world, and the least dynamic part. What is wrong? What is going wrong in Europe at the moment? And because everybody acknowledges that the situation in Europe is not good. I'm going to say something. Obviously, the cut off from Russia, the energy blockade has played a role. But the malaise was already there before. And we've all lived through the financial crisis. Alex and I know about the financial crisis as it affected Cyprus and Greece, but it affected everywhere, right across Europe. Even the period before the financial crisis, when there seemed to be growth, we can now see that was a very unstable and ephemeral growth. And already going way back into the 80s, 90s, late 70s, things were not really looking terribly good. So what is wrong? What has gone wrong in Europe?
Well, if you peel the onion all the way to its core, what's wrong is entirely in the monetary system that we have. It's a fraudulent monetary system. It's literally based on fraud. It's a Ponzi scheme, and it can remain stable only to the extent that it is growing. Now, how does it grow? All the money that we have in circulation today entered into circulation as debt. So somebody had to go to the bank, raise credit, and obtain money to do whatever they plan to do, whether it's real estate development or whatever, refineries, ships, whatever it be, economic activity that humans engage in. And so the trouble is that only the principal goes into circulation. It has to be repaid with interest. So let's say if you put $1 billion into circulation, but you have to repay 2 billion over the next 10, 20, 30 years, the second billion simply doesn't exist. It never went into circulation. So the debtor's ability to repay the debt depends on other people going into debt. And so then, if I'm a debtor, I can earn the money with interest from them and repay my banker. So the whole system depends into drawing more and more participants into it. And the problem arises because at a certain point in time, you saturate the economy with debt. Nobody would lend me $100 million, even though a bank might like to, but they will see that I would not be able to service that debt, and they would ask for collateral, and I don't have it. So once all the money good collateral has been tapped and drawn into the system, there is no more, and the system can no longer grow. And so if a Ponzi scheme can no longer grow, then it begins to implode immediately, and it implodes all the way into an economic depression, into complete collapse of the society. So that creates a very, very strong incentive to add other people's collateral into the mix. So you start going, developing colonies around the world. And this is what the Western world has been doing for the last 500 years and longer. But, by now it's been refined, not to perfection, but it's been advanced, and it's been also masked up with wonderful narratives about freedom and democracy and all of this. But you will notice that if you look deep into it, from revelations like the Pentagon Papers onwards, that it's always about resources, and resources are not something that you cannot obtain through trade. I'm from Croatia. Croatia doesn't have many military bases around the world. Our multinational corporations are not in the Middle East, in the Caspian region, or anywhere else. But I don't remember a day that we didn't have oil available at the gas pumps for us. We trade and we buy it. Croatia has tourism, so we earn foreign exchange and we buy oil and whatever we need to buy, right? You could say the same for Switzerland and all the other countries. Something is different for the Anglo-American world. They are the ones who have colonies around the world, and they are the ones who have military bases everywhere around the world. And they are the ones who, and this is an empirical fact, are behind starting 80%, more than 80% of all foreign wars between 1946 and today. The peace, the wonderful peace that we've had after World War II that they're selling us. Western corporations could equally, like Croatian and Swiss corporations, engage in trade and obtain all the resources that they need through, fair trade. But they don't. And why is that? Because there is one group in society which is keenly interested in controlling the resources as their collateral, and that is our banking oligarchies. It's the families who control the global systemically important banks, GSIBs. They're listed in Bank of International Settlements website. These are, banks like HSBC, JP Morgan, Goldman Sachs, etc. And so they are the only participant in our economic systems that have a very clear incentive to control these resources by force, to have them as collateral, because then they can issue loans to their clients. They are the clients are the visible arm of Western imperialism, like BP, Shell, Halliburton, corporations like this. But BP, Shell, and Halliburton could do business on other bases, or they could take loans from Chinese banks or from Russian banks or wherever. They, in terms of incentives, they would be indifferent where they take their financing, and they could also organize their business so that they don't need to conquer; they could just trade. Okay, so in order for the Western fraudulent monetary system to continue growing, they need to draw other people's resources, which is what creates the incentive to co-opt the political system and the military structures and the diplomatic structures and the economic wealth of the nation to fomenting this empire of military bases. And this has been the case throughout the past few centuries. And this is the story that comes to an end. A few months ago, Vladimir Putin famously said, "This vampire ball is now coming to an end." But what I wanted to stress is that all these wars don't happen because the Western world, the individual people in the Western world are particularly evil or warlike, that our corporations are particularly greedy more than the Russians or Chinese corporations. That's not the fact either. Is that we have originated this monetary system that creates the incentives for everything else. It's the foundation that ultimately poisons all other relations in society, that creates always, without fail, misery at home, mayhem abroad, and it's been perpetuating itself for a very long time. And now it comes to an end.
If you live in London, if you live in Britain, you can see this. You can see this very vividly, the extent to which the British economic and social system has been structured around empire. The fact that the British themselves never talk about this, the fact that empire is hardly taught in schools here. Just to say, it's a very strange fact that this huge event in British history is always downplayed in British social and educational discourse is remarkable. And as an outsider, which to some extent I am, I could see this all the time, and I could see the effect it's had on the British economy and British industry and British entrepreneurial activity and all of that. And it has been debilitating. Oh, it has caused extraordinary atrophy at the center in the imperial core. Now, that's Britain, that's France, to a great extent, very similar countries. They're both colonial empires. Other parts of Europe were not like this. I mean, Germany sort of dabbled with empire. They never quite got there, and they had an industrial structure of a kind. In fact, they had a very successful industrial structure. All that's coming apart now. Why is that happening? Why have the Germans let themselves why have other parts of Europe let themselves be drawn into this? Is it because what you said, the vampire managed to attract them to its ball? It also wanted those resources. It wanted the resources specifically in Russia, for example.
Well,
with which Germany was trading.
Yes, well, Russia is the biggest prize because Russian resources are estimated to be worth between 75 and 90 trillion US dollars. And so that would be a whole lot of collateral, which if the Western banking system controlled, then all the development loans, all the trade, all the financing would turn into a massive conveyor belt, transferring wealth from everybody who develops those resources to the Western banking oligarchy. And so breaking up Russia, destroying it as a political entity and turning it into a collection of weak client states that could always be pitted one against the other is the Western financiers' wet dream. It's the biggest prize. And it would also remove the largest and most powerful rival that they have in their quest to control the Eurasian landmass. And the quest to control the Eurasian landmass has been the obsession of the imperial class for centuries. And we had an explicit formulation of this imperative from Mackinder onwards. But also reformulated and reaffirmed by people like Zbigniew Brzezinski, who was advisor to 5 U.S. presidents about foreign policy, and it's basically be embraced by the neocons in U.S. presidential administrations. And the neocons are the people who ultimately formulate the American foreign policy. Now, a big mystery about this that people should focus on is that this is a band of highly ideological individuals who are organized, who are relatively few, whose interests are not really intersecting with the interests of ordinary American individuals and businesses who should be, the sovereign, the bearers of sovereignty in the U.S. democracy, but who somehow have this disproportional power to wield influence on U.S. foreign policy. Why that is and how that is needs to be explained. And I believe that it is because they have the support of the banking oligarchy, who ultimately, control the not only the military-industrial complex, but also the media.
And just to quickly touch on this, one of the great mysteries for me is why the United States, which is very different from Britain in so many respects, it's a big continental country, it's got abundant resources of its own, has evolved into something that seems to follow very much the course that Britain did. It's almost restructured its society, its economic system, its foreign policy, as a continuation of what Britain was doing in the 19th and first half of the 20th century. And the British and American political and economic worlds have in a very strange way, which I don't understand. I mean, they've sort of merged. Would you agree about that? Just very quickly, because it is, again, maybe it's connected once more to finance. If anybody knows anything about American history, they would know the enormous role that British finance played in organizing the US, the role J.P. Morgan played, for example, in mediating all of that. But anyway, just quickly on that point before we move on to what's going on the other side, what the Chinese, the Russians, and all of them are doing.
Yes. So just quickly, this is not an accident. When the British Empire, when the imperial cabal depleted their British host, they realized that they need a new host and a more powerful host, and so they made a deliberate decision. And this was decided really in a smoke-filled rooms where men discuss things together, to co-opt the United States to become the next, muscle man and global cup for the British Empire. Now, when we say British Empire, this has hardly anything to do with the British people. This is simply Britain is simply played the host nation to the empire. It still does, except that the economic, political, and military muscle has been co-opted from the United States, and they formed this Pilgrims Club in the United States. They sprayed a lot of money among people like Carnegie, J.P. Morgan, and others, and they simply co-opted the American legitimate political structures into becoming the water bearer for the empire.
Absolutely. Can I say I've been in some of those smoke-filled rooms. I haven't been part of those conversations. But by the way, those discussions that you've just mentioned, I mean, you actually can find quite open records about them in London.
Yes.
I mean, in the 1890s and early 1900s, people were quite openly talking about this. How do we keep the show going? We get the United States to join us. It's all set out. There's actually public speeches by people like Joseph Chamberlain, for example, people surprisingly not well known aspect of British and American history. Let's talk about the other side, because you mentioned the Russians. The Russians are now hosting this meeting in Kazan, the one that the British media doesn't want to talk about, which is too horrible to even face. They're going to face this meeting. They're going to host this meeting in Kazan. There is talk about setting up messaging, interbank messaging systems. And I want to stress messaging systems. It seems to be all about trade. We go straight back to what you were saying at the beginning, that you can obtain resources through trade rather than simple imperial appropriation. That is absolutely the impression I'm getting from all of the discussions that I'm seeing, that this is all about setting up a system, an actual system of trade, as opposed to the imperial system that is now starting to buckle. Again, is that your impression? And perhaps you can provide some more details.
Yeah, it's definitely the intent, and they are very, very serious about it. The Russians are, the Chinese are, and I think pretty much all of the Brics countries, even though many of the Brics countries today are still in a relatively vulnerable position with relation to the empire. They still have extensive ties with the IMF, and they are, for some reason, they are very, very nervous about rocking the boat with the IMF. But I think that the process is moving slowly as a tsunami, and I think that there's enough of political and economic power behind it that it will be successful. So they are already conducting very substantial trade bypassing the US dollar. So I think that something like 90% of trade between China and Russia today is denominated in rubles or renminbi, yuan. Something like 50% of Russia-India trade is denominated in their individual local currencies, and so this is gaining momentum. And now it seems to me that this the unit that it was Pepe Escobar who first brought my attention to it. It seems to be a very, very serious attempt to completely change the global trade payment architecture for the future. And I initially thought, when I first downloaded the white paper of the unit, that it was a gimmick, that it was yet another crypto something or other. But I read the paper eventually about 2 weeks ago, and I realized this was very, very serious. This is very a very sophisticated novelty, and that I think that it will be given due attention, and it might become the new trade settlement system, not just currency, but a system. And so rather than it being centralized in, Bank of England or later Federal Reserve Bank, where everybody who wanted to trade internationally had to have an account with the Federal Reserve, like every country. And there they had to have, all their dollar, revenues accrue. And then, of course, that gave the empire power over them, because if you wanted to spend those dollars, they could say like, well, no, you can't do this. Why don't you just invest in our treasuries? They give you nice little return. They're safe and everything. And so the whole world ended up financing the empire by being forced into the empire's trade settlement system and to use the empire's currency. So this is now what becomes undone. And rather than it being now moving to the next center, whether it be Beijing or Shanghai or Moscow or wherever, it's meant to be multinodal. So the unit envisions participants in the system, which it's not explicitly stated, but I think that they mean central banks, even though it seems that it's open that other types of participants might be able to set up nodes. And so rather than the trade settlement system architecture being centralized as a large hierarchy under some potentially somebody's political control. It's going to be decentralized under many different nodes, which will have to, which will have to work within the rules framework of this new architecture. But the framework is, let's call it, democratic, in the sense that many different participating nations will be able to give their input into how this should be organized. Let's say that the skeleton is now outlined, but maybe the details to the blueprint will need to be set out with time. And some people say, like, oh well, this is taking forever, this is such a slow motion development. People forget that the Bretton Woods system, even though it was, the Bretton Woods conference, was a short-term event, the Bretton Woods system wasn't fully implemented until something like 1958.
Yeah.
So it was also a very long drawn process where you went from the let's call it the basic outlines of the architecture to a fully implemented system. And then we also know that it lasted about 13 years from then, because it essentially fell apart in 1971.
Yeah.
So I think that the system that Brics nations are pushing forward will be successful, because it will be more equitable, it will be more fair, it will not incentivize conquest, it will not incentivize creation of military bases and forceful grab for resources. It will incentivize fair trades. So, many nations will be torn between the Western system and the new system. And I think that the incentives will slowly push them to the new system.
Precisely because it is more democratic and more peaceful and less predatory.
Yes, it's fairer, it's more equitable, and it is explicitly being designed to be that way. Yeah. Whereas the Western system is explicitly designed to favor a very, very narrow set of vested interests around, Western banks and the banking cartel, and to everybody else's detriment. And then this is one of those juggernauts which, the farther it goes, the more onerous it becomes on people who participated in it, and more beneficial to the ultimate vested interest. And this is why we see that after centuries of continuity, the countries that participate in this they have not developed. The poverty and misery is still endemic. And so I think that many countries will be looking to the new system with hope. And I think that it'll take very little time to show the proof in the pudding that, just as the Chinese managed to raise 800 plus million people out of poverty, we're going to see swathes of humanity begin to rise out of poverty. And then everybody else will start thinking like, hey, that all brick stuff seems to be working. Let's look into it. And the political pressures that will emanate from that will make it irresistible to, even to the political puppets in the Western nations. Because, when the groundswell of public opinion shifts in favor of something and against something else, then the puppets in charge can no longer resist it.
Because this is intellectual and structural backing behind it. I'm going to give an example of how the old system worked, because I remember that there was a G7 summit that was held in Gleneagles in Scotland in the 1990s. Yeah. Tony Blair organized it. It was all going to be about lifting Africa out of poverty. There was huge amount of publicity around this. All kinds of declarations flowed from it. And nothing changed, absolutely nothing. And nobody talks about it anymore. It's as if that incident that summit never took place. And that, I think, has been the consistent pattern ever since I can remember, that every so often we suddenly get this call in the West that, we must do something about Africa, or we must do something about India, but nothing ultimately ever changes, because the underlying structure, the actual system, never changes. It continues to
Yes.
be predatory in the same way as it always was. And now potentially it could change. And it's logical that it should be driven by these two, principally these two very different countries, because Russia, you'd mentioned its enormous resources. So it has an interest in actually trading its resources other than having them extracted from it in the way that people in the West have been saying. By the way, I ought to say, a couple of years ago in London, before Putin came, I remember people talking about Russia as Nigeria with snow. Just this, we would repeat in Russia. I remember those conversations, do in Russia the same thing that Shell is doing in southern Nigeria with snow. So
Yes.
the Russians want to trade. They don't want to have themselves, exploited and extracted. And the Chinese, as the great manufacturing power, they want to be able to trade too. They don't
Yes.
want to be locked into a system, which is what one senses all of these sanctions and tariffs are all about, in which they continue to produce cheap products for the West, to the West's advantage, rather than see their own economy develop and develop further. And is that where the tensions are? Is that ultimately what the sanctions are all about? I mean, we have all of the politics and all of the talk about conflicts and wars and things of this kind, and Chinese overcapacity and all of these narratives. But is it also partly an attempt to try to prevent development happening in these other societies, because doing so would ultimately unbalance the Western system?
Well, yes, preventing development is well, it's not stated explicitly, but is definitely a core goal of Western imperialism. And the reason is because the Western system, the banks and the corporations that grow up around them, want to have monopoly on the resources they control. They don't want, Nigeria or Congo or Angola to develop a vibrant economy, because they would become competitors for the resources that they produce. They would absorb their oil, their cobalt, their aluminum, iron, whatever you have. They would absorb them at home. And in competing with Western corporations for those resources, they would bid up the price. So all of a sudden, all those resources would become much, much more expensive to the likes of Halliburton and BP and Rio Tinto and so forth. So preventing the development, the economic development of these nations that are under colonial control is absolutely part of the strategy. And this is where the new system completely diverges, because the Chinese have positioned themselves as the global manufacturing hub, and over time they go from more basic goods to more sophisticated goods. And in order for their system to be functional, they want to have more affluent consumers everywhere around the world. So their strategy is exactly to help countries attain such economic development that a large part of their population are those affluent consumers, that people have money to spend. And then you will buy stuff made in China, and that makes perfect sense to the Chinese. But you might also buy things made in Russia. And, if the West gets their act together, we could participate in that. Because, I mean, imagine if you have even a little bit of an entrepreneurial spark in you, and now you have maybe a population of 1 billion or 2 or 3 billion consumers around the world who have some money to spend. And even if you're able to reach a very small segment of them, if you make $1 from 1 million people, well, that could work very well for you. So for anybody in the West, the winemakers in France, watchmakers in Switzerland, apparel makers in Italy. Britain has brilliant hi-fi equipment that is, it's an industry that is dying, to my massive regret, because, that is something that improves quality of life and that I would like to be able to buy. But it is all being destroyed in favor of large corporate systems and concentration. And so, we in the West have a choice to participate in this, burgeoning new world that is going to bring human prosperity and standards of living to new levels that have never been attained yet in history, or maybe they have been, but only in a very small local environments. This time, this could go global. So, it will be detrimental to the banking oligarchies who wish to control all this to their exclusive benefit, but it would be very beneficial to everybody else, not only in the third world, in the global south, in China and India and Russia, but even in the populations of Western Europe and UK and the United States and everywhere else.
Indeed, it would enable us to escape the post-imperial trap that we find ourselves in places like Britain. Now, what do you say, though, to people in the West, in Britain, in the United States, who in the meantime are very afraid of this? They say, well, even if we understand what you say, you're talking about the fact that we might eventually find ourselves in this extremely prosperous and affluent time, but that's going to be 10, 20 years into the future. We're worried about tomorrow. If all of these systems develop, we could find ourselves in a deep crisis in the meantime. We could see an implosion of our economic systems. We'll have terrible poverty, maybe inflation. It's too long into the future for us. So we've got to support our governments which try to hold it back, because ultimately, in the meantime, today, tomorrow, the day after tomorrow, our interests, our economic interests are still bound up with the existing system. What do you say to people like that? And, you will find people like that who talk in that way.
Well, I would tell them that they have no choice about the economic crisis anyway. The economic crisis is coming anyhow. Yeah. And I think it will be one for history books. This is not going to be, 2000 dot-com bubble or, 1997 East Asian financial crisis or 1998 global financial crisis. 2008 global financial crisis. This is going to be more on the scale of Weimar Republic or the collapse of the Soviet Union or the Great Depression in the United States. That type of crisis is coming to us, and it's coming to us inevitably. It's a mathematical certainty. It's only a matter of time. And so the question will be, do we want to dig ourselves out from under this rubble on our own through individual action, through entrepreneurship, or do we want to be shackled to the powers that be that have brought us into this crisis? Remember, the 2008 global financial crisis essentially never went away. We're still in the wake of that crisis, and we have allowed the people who created that crisis to also create the solution to the crisis, which they haven't done. They've only protected their own interest at everybody else's detriment. And the next eruption is going to be orders of magnitude worse than what we lived through 15 years ago. So the choice will eventually be ours, and we will have to make that choice understanding that one path leads into the status quo. And the status quo with the current monetary system is periods of prosperity driven by credit expansion and then crises. Crises are almost constant in the Western financial system. We keep being promised this, growth and it's going to be better with the next administration, and we're going to come out of the. but we're always in a crisis. It's almost nonstop. There's a period. There's one business cycle when the credit cycle is expanding, that everybody feels prosperity, and then everybody thinks that things are going in the right direction. But as soon as the system becomes saturated with debt, and this debt has to be repaid, then you have this crisis from which they only use one approach to managing it, and that is by printing funny money and plugging up the holes and backstopping all the losses. But it's really drawing the life's energy from the whole society, and we feel it as a crisis. Walk around the cities of the UK or the United States, you see with your own eyes what this is amounting to.
Absolutely. Alex Krainer, I have one very last question. It's about the topic we discussed just before the program started, and it's about the budgetary crisis that we see in Britain. There's been a lot of discussion about, the causes of it, but you've made several comments about the British having given loan guarantees to Ukraine, which are coming due, which is, I think, plays well into the topic that we've been talking about. Can you just explain what you understand about this, because it's not been talked about at all here? And then that will be where I finish, and then we can go over to Alex, and he'll put some questions to you.
Yeah, so I've been, my day job is in financial markets and has been for a little over 25 years now, and so I spend every day reading through financial press and trying to understand the big picture. And one thing that I kind of realized only recently is that whereas you get a good deal of transparency around the world, in terms of statistics and monetary aggregates and inflation and debt and GDP and employment and all these things, I realized that Britain on that map is almost like that pixelated area where you don't really understand it. Then I asked some other people, do they feel the same way? And then they realized, well, now that you mention it, yeah, actually, Britain is almost like a blind spot in global financial markets, and I think it's by design. We're not being told. And I try to look into the official, Britain has the government of national statistics or something like this. I think it's called ONS or whatever. And if you look there, you see that, the debt is growing, the deficits are growing. But I think in August, we hit 100% debt to GDP ratio. And you look at all these statistics that are available, and they're not good numbers, but they're hardly panic-inducing stuff. It's almost normal given the state of things in the rest of the world. But I then question, why has the British government and the Bank of England reacted with such I would say panic, let's say over the summer months in July and August of this year. There's been a very hard clampdown on freedoms, on protests, on freedom of speech in Britain, under the pretext of these conflicts between the local communities and the immigrant communities, between Christians and Muslims, whatever it be. It's all contrived and untrue, but it gave the government the pretext to clamp down hard and to make freedom of speech basically history. And then also there was a sudden, very strange introduction of repos by the Bank of England as a mechanism to provide financial liquidity to British banks and other financial institutions. Repos, just for your viewers to understand, are a type of secured loan. Their repo stands for repurchase agreements, where, let's say, if I needed money and I wanted to borrow it from, let's say, Alexander, let's say I have some British gilts on my balance sheet. I would sell them to Alexander for a given price. They would be the collateral against which Alexander could provide me cash, so I would have that cash. and then I would agree to repurchase those gilts from Alexander at a slightly higher price, and that would reflect the interest rate for that loan. So this is routine business in many Western nations. It's very useful to the financial industry. But when the central bank steps in to be the provider of liquidity, that suggests that something in the system is broken, and that private institutions no longer trust other private institutions to participate in these repo agreements. So the sudden opening of the repo facility by the Bank of England, to me, was a massive red flag. And then I looked into a little bit what is going on with the Ukraine thing. There was a whole series of meetings between Keir Starmer and Zelensky spent 2 days in London, and he got to address the British cabinet, the first person to have done so since Bill Clinton in 1997. And so I realized something was not right. And so if you look at the figures, you would come up with about 13 billion pounds that the Britain provided for Ukraine. But then there's also other damages from sanctions, which are hard to quantify. But we know that the farmers reported that the artificial fertilizers, which used to cost 250 pounds per ton before sanctions, now cost 1,000 pounds per ton, that the cost of energy has skyrocketed in Britain, that there are other secondary, for example, British Airways had this connection to direct flight to Beijing, which they lost because of Russia sanction. It was a very important part of BA's business. It was I think 2 or 3 times weekly connection, and they simply lost this because of the Russia sanctions, because they couldn't overfly Russian territory, and so now they had to fly all the way around, and their flight became uncompetitive, and now they had to cancel it altogether, and they gifted this business to their Chinese competitors, and now obviously British manufacturers lost the Russian markets, and so forth and so on. And so the damage from this is really difficult to quantify. But we have, in June 2023, we had Joseph Borrell, who ran his mouth in a conference where he said that, oh yeah, the Europe provided 60 billion euros in military and financial aid to Ukraine, but the actual damage to European economy is on the order of 700 billion euros. So if we take that scale together and we say, like, well, if the hit to British economy was commensurate to the hit to the European economy, then we're talking about not 13 billion, but we're talking about 150 billion pounds. That begins to explain the panic reactions by the British government and the Bank of England. And then it's not only that, it's not only Ukraine. The British are very, very involved in the Middle East. Then there's all these nonsensical net zero things where I think just in 2022 or 23, I forget, the British government spent something like 23 billion pounds on climate mitigating measures. I don't know what that is exactly, but just in 1 year they spent 22 or 23 billion pounds on that. It's unproductive. And so it seems to me that the British establishment has bet very, very heavily on a number of unproductive agendas, which are now failed investments. And so something is going to go off the rails. And that's my impression. And to come to these conclusions, you're really obliged to read between the lines. But I will publish this because I literally just made this analysis in the last 2 days. I also wanted to see, there's this thing called the wisdom of crowds, and I wanted to see what are the markets saying. So I compared the performance since 2021 between the British gilts, US 10-year Treasury notes, and the German bonds. And sure enough, the British gilts have performed the worst. And so over the last 4 years, more or less, the British gilts have lost about 29%. German Bund has lost between 24 and 25%, and American 10-year Treasury note has lost only 18%. So we see that the markets are penalizing British sovereign debt more than that of other nations, even though arguably, Europe is in just as much trouble over all these nonsensical agendas as Britain is. But I think that the British establishment, which is maybe most strongly oligarchic and least transparent of all, has bet more heavily into these failed investments, and the price to pay will be for the history books.
Alex Krainer, thank you very much. That's an outstanding series of answers, if I can say altogether. Thank you. And I'm now going to hand over to Alex, because obviously I've got my questions, but I'm sure people will want to do so as well.
You have time for 15, 20 minutes of questions, Alex?
Yes, absolutely.
Great. Let's begin with Alan. Alan Shepard says, I hear rumors that the Vietnamese dang is going to go very high in value. Is there truth to that? Can you answer that, or do you know?
Unfortunately, I don't know the answer to that question. I would have to guess, and my guess would be probably as good as yours.
Best not to guess on that. Thank you, Alan, for that. Ralph Steiner says the British-U.S. Empire dream of conquering the European heartland through World War I and World War II was expensive, and Britain appears drained. Can Britain still rule the world?
No, it's a pipe dream at this point. There's no realistic way that this could happen. Britain is depleted economically, but it's also depleted militarily. All they have at this point is their intelligence services and their diplomacy, which can still make this happen, but more in terms of sabotage and destruction than constructing any kind of a new world order.
Ralph Steiner says the British Empire was well known for moving populations around like economic resources. This trait survived decline, and mass immigration and population replacement continues. Does this have any negative effects?
In the short term, yes. In the long term, I can't say really. British Empire is not the only one who has done this. I think all empires do that. They colonize and they encourage people to populate the colonies. And they, for some reason that is really weird for me to understand, is they also import populations from colonized subjects. Roman Empire did this. Practically the whole of Italian peninsula has been depopulated almost completely over the centuries during the Roman Empire, and repopulated by people from the Middle East and from Asia Minor and elsewhere. I think that this is a part of this system of governance. If we look at Italy today, other than migrants, you'd come across a lot of Italians, right? And all these Italians look like they are from there and they belong there, but they're not the Etruscans. There's hardly any Etruscans left on the Italian peninsula, and practically the Italians are all consist of people who have migrated to Italy during the days of Roman Empire and afterwards. So in the long term, I don't know. I think that things tend to normalize, that people tend to either create new hybrid cultures or adapt to the existing cultures on the continent. The same is the case for, let's say, Croatia. In the Roman days, there used to be a tribe called the Illyrians who lived there, and then the Slavs came in between the 7th and 9th century. And so today, the language that's spoken in Croatia is a Slavic language. It's similar to Czech and Polish and Russian and so on, but we weren't there before the 7th century. So I think that long-term things normalize and populations kind of converge on the way human populations tend to live. In the short term, obviously, it can create a lot of pain.
Oscar N says the Norway prime minister was in China and signed some economic cooperation now. I thought Norway is not in the EU, only followed US-EU interest. Norway for Brics, perhaps?
We'll see. I think it's possible. Well, the world is about to change really dramatically. I mean, the defeat of Ukraine will have tectonic effects. It'll be an earthquake, and there will be a lot of aftershocks. The whole architecture of the European, security, not only security architecture, but also economic integrations on the European continent will change. I think that there will be a moment when Russia will take control of Odessa, not militarily, but in administrative sense, absolutely. They will make sure that the Odessa has a political leadership that's friendly to Russia. They're going to clean out the neo-Nazi element from the structures of power, and then Russia will have full control of the whole northern coast of the Black Sea, all the way to where the Danube flows into the Black Sea. That will open the gates to landlocked nations of the EU, like Hungary, like Slovakia, like Austria, and they will be much less susceptible to blackmail from Brussels and from Washington. And so this will give choices to these nations, and to the east there will be this prosperous world where economy is burgeoning, and they could do business with, and on the other side in the west there's going to be this dysfunctional bureaucratic morass and stagflation to no end. Even if you assassinate Robert Fico, and even if you try to regime change Viktor Orban, that will have only short-term effect. And we can see that even now. They regime changed Pakistan. They got rid of Imran Khan, but even Pakistan now wants to join the Brics. So, the tides of history are turning. Brics is the idea whose time has come, and they're not going to easily. They're not going to be able to. At this point, they're like the King Canute flogging the waves to stem the tide. And Norway is a symptom of this, and I think that we're going to see a lot more of that.
Jamila says the IMF is to destroy Nigeria and Kenya. Now they destroyed Ethiopia. What do you think? Also, Tony Blair, he foresees digital IDs in Ethiopia. I appreciate if you know something.
Alex, I know little. I know little about Tony Blair wanting to introduce digital ID in Ethiopia, but I know a little bit more about the IMF. And the IMF is global financial cartels' tip of the spear. They are extraordinarily powerful, and they're extraordinarily dangerous. You probably haven't heard this on any other program. You're hearing it here first. But the IMF is where the orders to launch the anti-terror operation in Ukraine in May of 2014 originated. So this came from around the time of the what's it called, the central bankers gathering, annual gathering in late August, early September.
Jackson Hole.
Yeah, so from Jackson Hole, Jack Lew spoke with Christine Lagarde, who was then the head of the IMF, and Christine Lagarde passed the orders to the Ukrainian junta then to take control of the south and east of Ukraine by force, or else the deal with the IMF would not, the IMF will not be able to support Ukrainian government. So this is when the junta in Kiev launched the anti-terror operations, and it was also preceded by a lot of these people going to Kiev and encouraging them to do so. So IMF is a very dangerous player, and it's very clear from the behavior of different governments around the world that they're very afraid of IMF. The war against Yemen in 2000, and when was it? 15? I'm blank now, but it ensued when Yemen rejected IMF's offer, and the same thing happened in Bolivia. The coup in Bolivia happened in the aftermath of Bolivia rejecting the IMF offer for funding. So these are people to be taken seriously, and this is another important reason why a new monetary system and the new trade financing architecture in the world are urgently needed.
Alexander, do you want to add anything to that? Maybe something on Ethiopia? Do you know, or?
I don't know very much about Ethiopia, about digital IDs and Tony Blair's enthusiasm for them, and his attempt to introduce them here in the UK. That I remember extremely well. He encountered a huge amount of resistance when he was Prime Minister, but of course he's never given up, and he's now plugging that idea all over again. And of course the technology has moved on, and he wants to adapt his idea to the evolving technologies. And the interesting thing is that whereas back when he was Prime Minister, much of the political, the people in politics opposed him, today that opposition seems to be melting away. So we could very, very easily, very quickly find ourselves in that direction. The British, just on a brief question about Ethiopia, the British have an enormous interest in Ethiopia because after the Second World War, it was the British who basically drove the Italians out of Ethiopia. The Ethiopians, by the way, fought against the Italians very, very courageously, but it was the British Army that found itself there. The British then forged very close relations with the Ethiopian monarchy. The British monarchy, the members of the royal family, were very, very friendly with Haile Selassie and his retinue. The university in Addis Ababa was basically very dominated by the British, for British academics and people sent there, and was in direct competition, as I happen to know, with a Russian Soviet set up polytechnic, which provided engineering education. It's all very interesting. I mean, it's, again, very different types of education. So the British have always been in conflict with, as they see it, the Russians for influence in Ethiopia. And if you go back to the period before the First World War, during that time, Ethiopia, the ruler of Ethiopia at that time, Menelik, he actually wanted to keep Ethiopia independent, both of the Italians and also of the British. And as a result, he positioned Ethiopia in the late 19th and early 20th century as the major ally in Africa of Russia. And there was this very close connection between the Russians and the Ethiopians at that time. So this is a long story, and that the British are interested in Ethiopia, well, that indisputably is so.
Rices asks, Alex, why is the U.S. so afraid of the non-Western countries being successful in development and tech?
Well, they don't like competition. They like to dominate markets. They like to be the sole provider. I think it's natural. This is this is the logic of any businessman. You want to control the marketplace. You want to be the dominant player on the marketplace because that's a profitable place to be. But the ideal, like what they say, our values should be free market competition. So always make the best man win. Unfortunately, however, deep in the bowels of the system, I think that the ethos is more is closer to the Tonya Harding approach to competition. And for people who are not old enough, I remember when I arrived to the United States in 1987 as a 17-year-old, as a foreign exchange student, there was this big scandal between two skaters, Tonya Harding and Nancy Kerrigan. Nancy Kerrigan was the better one, more talented one, and more beautiful one. And Tonya Harding was the runner-up, the rival. And so because Nancy Kerrigan was better, I think it was about qualifying for Olympics or something like that. Tonya Harding had the brilliant idea of having her boyfriend kneecap Nancy Kerrigan. And so that's one way to prevail in competition. You realize you're not good enough, so let's just make sure that the other person is worse than you. And if you break their knee, then you're the better one. And so I think that unfortunately, at some level, there's a lot of people who have no problem with this idea. And so, they'll use sanctions, they will use sabotage, they will go as far as, well, let's say that the more benevolent approach is to poach talent from other nations, which has been done for decades by the United States. They would just simply cream the top talent from China, India, from Eastern Europe, from everywhere, and bring them to the United States to work for them. But failing that, then you block those companies, you sanction them, you make it difficult for them to do business around the world. And I think that there are some people who have no problem even assassinating key people, or as we saw with Huawei, abducting their executives and imprisoning them. So that's the Tonya Harding approach to competition.
Mm-hmm. Beverly Trout says, appreciate the guest's emphasis on wake up on the planet. Wake up, planet.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Alex. On that note, Alex Krainer, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you very, very much.
Thank you. Once again, Alex, where can people follow you?
Substack, Alex Krainer's Trend Compass, and Twitter X at Naked Hedgie.
I have those links in the description box, and I will also add those links as a pinned comment. The excellent Alex Krainer. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you. Take care.
Take care. All right, Alexander, are you with me?
Oh, absolutely. For a fascinating program altogether. Amazing program, actually. When I said I've been to those smoke-filled rooms, of course, they're not full of smoke anymore because but I have. I mean, if you go to St. James's and where all the discussions still take place and in London, and they certainly did take place there. And, going back to what Alex was just saying now about, kneecapping people, the great difference with 19th century Britain is that they were quite straightforward and open about it. If you read the newspapers of that time, I mean, the fact that they were sending the fleet somewhere to, shell people or attack, the British at that time were quite straightforward about what they did and why they were doing it. And because they didn't wrap it all up in all of the sort of rhetoric that we have to endure nowadays, about, human rights, values, all of that, in some ways it was done more straightforwardly and more intelligently. Today, because it has to be done in this very complicated way and justified and rationalized and all of that, it's in the end, it's more chaotic and it's somehow less convincing.
Yeah, it was done straightforward back then because not many
Yeah.
people would know about it or learn
Well,
about it
no,
or hear about
absolutely.
it.
Absolutely.
And now because of media and now social
Yeah.
media and the internet, everyone can
Yeah.
hear about what these people are planning. So they have to dress
Exactly.
it up.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But if you talk about your Cyprus, for example, you look at the discussions that were taking
Oh,
place in London about control of Cyprus in the 1870s. It's absolutely, there's no attempt to pretend that it's anything else other than a power grab and control of the Suez Canal and the Eastern Mediterranean and all of that.
It's all there.
And it's all there. It's straightforward. Yeah. So they weren't blinded by their own rhetoric in any way. Their vision was much more clear, and the British equivalents of the neocons, who did exist, all these people of that kind, they could talk quite openly, they could plan quite openly, they could hold their discussions, they could think it through, they could consult, because there wasn't the embarrassment about it that there is to some extent today.
Yeah. All right. From Ralph Steiner, British U.S. Tank Expeditionary Division busted, is bogged down in the first muds of the Rasputitsa around Kursk. Can the Anglo-Americans still muster an invasion force for Iran, like the war film Shaving Ryan? Saving Private Ryan is actually, but okay. Alexander, have you heard about this?
Well, I haven't heard about.
Force?
I haven't heard anything about this specifically, but about the fact that Western tanks have proved completely unsuccessful in Ukrainian combat environment, in the landscape. I don't think there's anybody who disputes this anymore. There's a brilliant, not brilliant, but there's a fascinating discussion which you can find on video, actually, between a reporter from the British tabloid The Sun and Jack Watling, who is an academic at RUSI, the Royal United Services Institute. And he says straightforwardly, our tanks are no good. They're too big, they're too heavy, they can't operate in soft earth conditions, they break down all the time. Ultimately, Russian tanks are better. Straightforward as that.
Studio Rainer says, I have a friend who lives in Israel right now. He explained his lifestyle, and it's like Soviet level state run, but he couldn't accept when I said he should leave. It's subversion that requires military intervention to solve.
Well, people have an incredible and very powerful attachment to their own countries, and that's a reality. I mean, it's a reality in every place that you will find, and including in Israel, where of course people have gone to Israel to be part of that country. So the attachment is stronger still.
Sanjeva says, hello, Duran. Greetings again. Greetings, Sanjeva. Good to have you with us. Let's see. Sanjeva says, one of three. I don't think we say this enough. Thank you, Alex and Alexander, and contributors like Zarael. I can personally attest that Duran is unique, that many of us found solace listening and participating in the Duran. And finding a community in good times and bad, especially in fraught political times. Early in 2022, at the darkest times, Duran was a refuge for many of us facing social resentment. My wife is Russian. And part 3 says, so thank you that you do this every day in health and sickness. May you have good health and not diagnostics. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Sajeva, for that. Studio Rainer says, has anyone noticed that we're in a time like the Napoleonic Wars? Democracy and freedom was a military tactic. The U.S. is like if Napoleon won and forgot his strategy of attack was that ideology?
I think there's enough truth of this. I mean, I haven't seen people make that parallel exactly, except to some extent in Russia, where, of course, the Russians like to say, look, we've absorbed attacks from the West. The one we're going through now is not so different from the ones we had to parry in the 40s and the one we had to parry when Napoleon came and battled all his way to Moscow, which is about as far, by the way, as any Western invasion force of Russia has ever reached. Just saying.
One sec, Alexander. And from Ralph Steiner, Anglo-Zionist Empire, UK, USA, Israel is now primed to attack Iran. And delay now could prove fatal as armies are primed militarily and politically. Your thoughts?
Well, I think this is now the big thing. I mean, I've been talking about this for months. We've been talking about this on the Duran for months. I am absolutely convinced that that attack is coming. And we've done a program in which we discussed how all the actions that Iran is taking now are consistent with Iran being aware that this attack was coming and preparing for it. My own view is that in the end, like every other military adventure we have seen for the last 30 years, this one will end disastrously. I mean, it may be a protracted and horrible business as it continues over, the months and eventually the years, but in the end, it will backfire disastrously on its initiators.
Mama Alaska says, thank you, gentlemen, for your consistent reporting. Thank you for that. Mama Alaska. Studio Rainer says, this is what the rebellion will look like. Russian troops walking into the EU and everyone watches from their windows. Without military intervention, subversion cannot be undone.
Well, I don't think the Russians want to go deep into Europe, actually. Why would they? What would they gain by doing so? I mean, from their point of view, they want to keep as far away from us as they possibly can. They want to be left alone. They got lots of things they want to sort out in their own country. They want to set up all their global and financial systems and all of that. And they want us to leave them alone. And we won't do that. We constantly picking fights with them for the reasons I think ultimately that Alex Krainer said. We look at this huge country and its enormous resources, and we want the resources and we don't want the huge country. So that's why we have this constant issue with the Russians. I don't think they want to come over to take us over because we have nothing to give them that they need. They just want us to leave them alone.
Nikos says there's a two-part. Pascal from Neutrality Studies has said that Greece was once interested in joining Brics. Was it under Tsipras? I'd love for you to talk about Greece.
I've never seen that. I have absolutely never seen that. If it was ever floated at all, it was intended entirely deceitfully. Because I can tell you for a fact, and I'm sure Alex will agree with me, that the political class in Greece, every single element and part of it is absolutely bought and owned by the Euro-Atlantic community. I mean, you'll find the odd communist here and there who might have different views. You'll find a few people on the right, what is always called the far right, and there are people like that in Greece too, but ultimately the political class have no interest in joining Brics. They don't have any conception of it.
Zero interest, absolutely zero. Negative interest in joining Brics. They're 1,000% committed to
absolutely
to the European Union and more importantly to the US.
I'm going to just disclose something which I told Alex a short time ago, which is I met a friend of mine who is close to a very senior diplomat in the Greek Foreign Ministry. This person, his job is to try and forge relations with countries in Asia. And he is encountering the fact that the Greek government is completely not interested. They're not interested in India. They're not interested in China. They're not interested in any place at all, except the place they're mostly interested in is the United States, Washington, and to a certain extent, Brussels. But that is the world that they know. They're not interested in anything else.
Yeah. Nikos also says, part 2, are you interested in how culture affects foreign policy? Do you want me to ask Nerdrotic or the drinker, the critical drinker, in a super chat if they want to talk to you?
Well,
Real
that
quick,
would be-
Alexander, I would say it would be great to do a show with Nerdrotic, who's awesome, and it would be great to do a show with the critical drinker, who is awesome, and I love film, and I know that you
Yeah,
love film
absolutely.
as well, Alexander. So anyway,
Absolutely.
are you
No,
interested
I mean,
in how
the-
culture affects foreign policy?
Absolutely. And I think that the importance of culture in foreign policy is underestimated. If you want to understand Russian foreign policy, read Russian literature. Just to say, you want to understand Chinese foreign policy, look at Chinese painting. You will learn an awful lot more from those than you will from any number of studies that the CIA publishes. Just saying. Or the Rand Corporation, I should say.
True. Raphael says, thank you guys. We are still on fire.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Thank you, Raphael, for that. Lakeva says, all men of the world need to refuse military service contingent on 3 generations of bankers showing up on the front lines.
True.
True. Speaking the truth, give peace a chance. Thank you for that. Super chat. Ralph Steiner says, Keir Starmer has billions for Ukraine and yet cuts back on heating for pensioners as high streets close down. Is the nation of shopkeepers in decline?
Yes, it is. It's very much so. If you come here, even articles in British media admit this. Go to the Financial Times, the Guardian, the Daily Telegraph, 3 completely different newspapers, supposedly, 3 completely different political lines. Only that is overstated, but nonetheless, all admitting the same thing, that Britain is in the grip of a profound economic malaise and ultimately a decline.
Ilya Kuryakin says, when the crash comes, which currency will survive best?
I'm not going to say, I don't know. Gold. Presumably we'll all come back to that. But don't take any investment advice from me. I never give it, and I'm not in a position to.
Yeah. Linda, thank you for that super chat. Bobby, thank you for that super chat. Serbo Greek says, Galimera Levendes, Dobra den, brate Alex, Sve na Polsche. Thank you for that, Serbo Greek. Ralph Steiner says, Vem Miller, apparently Iranian, nearly killed Trump. I've heard that whole story. That whole narrative is imploding. Nonsense. Yeah, I heard the guy's a super Trump fan. That's what I heard. I don't know. Stana, thank you for that super sticker. Ralph Steiner says, imagine you're assassinated on a Persian golf course. Thank you for that, Ralph. And Ralph says, at least you're not speaking German, right? Thank you for that, Ralph, as well. Alfred, welcome to the Duran community. Beverly says, appreciate the guest's emphasis on woke, on wake up the planet. Yes, thank you, Beverly, for that. Ralph says, my name is Ozymandias, King of Kings. Look on my works, ye mighty, and despair. Nothing beside remains round the decay of that colossal wreck, boundless and bare. The lone and level sands stretch far away.
That's Shelley's one of the greatest poems that he wrote. Maybe he's most famous. Ozymandias, by the way, is Ramesses II, just to say, and it's based on a statue of Ramesses II, which the British brought with them to the British Museum, where you will find lots of things. It's full of all kinds of artworks, which the British, shall we say, they gained possession of all around the world. The most interesting thing about the British Museum is that you will find nothing British in it. Just so.
Kilo, good thoughts, good words, good deeds, says South Africa and the IMF. We are sitting on both.
Yeah.
Elza says IMF stands for the International Mafia of Finance, then, and in case of Ukraine, the IMF should participate in peace talks, shouldn't it?
Oh, of course it should. Of course, I mean, you don't want the IMF participating in peace talks. If they do, then you will get war. That's a guarantee.
I can't say the word peace anymore. I destroyed it for myself. I did it to myself, Alexander. Every time I say peace, I say peace. Peace is
I
summit.
know.
Like
I know.
Zelensky.
I know.
Anyway.
I should say that even the IMF has gone through a process of decay. The fact that for all that time it was run by someone like Christine Lagarde tells you a great deal about the kind of organization it has decayed into.
Yeah. Ralph Steiner says Ukrainians blew up the bloody Nord Stream bastards.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's
what
what the Wall Street Journal says.
Absolutely, so it must be true.
Yeah.
Just because the Wall Street Journal says it must be
That's
true.
what they reported. Yeah. Studio Rainer says the United Soviets of America, if Yuri Bezmenov is right, the entire West needs foreign military intervention to exchange anything. They cannot rebel or vote to fix it. Russia liberate the US.
Well, it's not so different from what we've just heard from Alex Krainer. I think that, let me repeat again, I don't think the Russians have any desire to come and liberate us. We will have to do it ourselves. If we don't do it politically, then the economic crisis that Alex Krainer is talking about will do it for us.
Nick, thank you for that super sticker. Elza says, Alexander, on the other hand, because the information is available today, the people in power have stopped to care and just dropped their masks.
I don't think they have dropped their masks. I think if you follow what they do, they are constantly trying to spin narratives and engage in that kind of information control. And of course, in order to make the narratives work, they have to suppress and close down and all alternative modes of discussion that they possibly can. So we have all of these studies going on in various universities and places like this, all over, proliferating all over the academic world now, about how to control information and assist governments in doing that. And can I just say, you have any contact with academia, you know how much money is now going into this.
Yeah. Bob says European economic decline is another word for European economic imprisonment by the West.
Yeah, it's true. Absolutely. It's a very good point, actually.
Yeah. Ruby Appel says, thanks as always. You guys made a brilliant live stream. Thank you, Ruby.
Thank you.
Yeah. For that. Commander Crossfire says, why anyone says Israel will lose? Israel's goal is to significantly reduce the Arab population in Palestine. Successful, there won't be any backlash.
Oh, there will be a backlash. I mean, the Israelis have been running this policy for, well, they've been running all kinds of policies in the Middle East, wars and things, and ultimately look at where they are now. Their economy is declining. The people are leaving. Things are getting worse for them, and I think they're going to continue to.
OG Wall, welcome to the Duran community. Ralph Steiner says, could Ian Proud give us some British views?
Absolutely, we'll get him back, no question.
Studio Reiner says, combine nukes and 2 oceans of isolation. Will the U.S. simply be another project like Ukraine? Will cartels need to take military intervention to reverse subversion? That would be interesting.
I'm going to say this. One of the great questions about 20th century history is why the United States let itself become anglicized, and because it doesn't need to. It's a profoundly different society from Britain. People underestimate how different America and Britain actually are from each other. I speak as somebody who knows both. I really do believe, and I still say, that there is an alternative course that the US could still follow. It's organized, its scale is completely different from Britain's. It could go back to being what it was, and it would work out better for it than staying and being what it is. Britain has much less room for maneuver than the US does.
Bastian Pashik, thank you very much for that super sticker. Winston says, I wanted to ask Alexander about Starmer holding an investment conference, an attempt to make the UK relevant. The dog barks, but the caravan moves on.
That's absolutely right. You've answered your question. I mean, what more to say than that? I mean, we've done many programs about Starmer on the Duran by now, and I think that one of the things that is becoming increasingly clear about Starmer, the more we see of him, is that this isn't someone who has the vision, the imagination, the charisma, the personality to make things happen. So he calls an investment conference. He calls together all the investors, the international investors. He tells them invest in Britain. And whatever he says, the very fact that it is he who is saying it, this lackluster, uncharismatic figure, is going to cause investors to say to each other, I don't want to invest in this person. He's not giving me any reason why I would invest in him, because ultimately I cannot have confidence that he's going to manage my investment wisely. So I think this investment conference fell completely flat and failed almost before it started. Britain, by the way, because of the structure of its economy, needs inflows of money from outside. It's very dependent on them. So persuading people to invest into Britain is for Britain economically an existential issue. Just saying. And Starmer is failing at even that.
Ralph Steiner says, is burning innocent hospital patients a Holocaust?
It can be. I don't, by the way, like the word. It's associated with certain religious practices of the ancient world, and I don't think we should sacralize events of this kind. So I avoid using it.
Elliot says, Russia has always had good relations with IL. Why would they risk take sides with IR? I believe IL is Israel and IR is Iran. Is that the question?
Yeah, but I mean, I think that's right. But I presume that is. But if I may say, I think that the Russians are, in effect, making their choice now. They look at the situation in the Middle East. They saying to themselves, where is the source of the instability? It is with the United States and its allies, which is, of course, one of which is Israel. They see what the Netanyahu government is doing. The Russians always want stability. They always want a situation where they don't have to worry about what is going on in an area not that far from their own borders. Always remember this about the Middle East. And I think that that's a view that more and more countries in the region itself are coming to share, thus the shift in Saudi policy, for example.
Yeah. And Studio Reiner says a global internet outage would be a gift from God. Things would normalize within a month.
Well, I think there's all kinds of people who would probably agree with you. Some of them could be found within government. Don't be surprised if one day, somebody does try to switch it all off. Not that I think it's possible to do anymore. Just
Commander Crossfire says Israel is rich despite its earlier campaigns. Those leaving are fewer than those going. How is this different? Palestine will be cleared. No one will remember.
No. Your last point is straightforwardly wrong. More people are leaving than are coming. Many more people are leaving than are coming. And I think one of the things that has been established over the events of the last year, is that the apparent success of the Israeli economy was built on very, very uncertain foundations.
Yeah,
Israel. Go on.
No, I was just going to say, I could tell you, I mean, anecdotally, what I see in Cyprus is a lot of people from Israel, from Lebanon, from the region are coming to Cyprus.
Absolutely.
Lot. I'm talking for a country the size of Cyprus, it's having a hard time dealing with all the people coming. Yeah.
I'm hearing the same about Greece, by the way. A lot of people from Israel are going to Greece.
Yeah, and not as asylum seekers or refugees or anything like that. They're coming. They're buying properties. They're placing roots here.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, but yeah, that's what I see here, at least on the ground.
Mm.
Studio Rainer says Iran is equal to U.S. Suez crisis. Bet $500 on it.
I wouldn't be surprised. It could turn out that way. I think the Suez crisis, a closer analogy actually, is Ukraine. Just to say.
Alexander, I think that's everything.
Wow.
Let me do a final check, and your final thoughts as I do a final.
I think it's a tour de force actually, that what we have heard, and I think this is I think Alex Krainer has got this absolutely right. We're going from an imperial, or if you like, post-imperial system, in the sense that the colonies were all dismantled, the colonial structures were dismantled, but the underlying economic structures and trade structures and extractive structures that had been created continued. But the process of decolonization, which began in the 1950s, is now ultimately reaching its logical point, where the world is just breaking away and is reforming in a way that is completely different, and which the Europeans, and to some extent the Americans, really haven't mentally adjusted to. So it's a huge shift in the economic and world balance of power.
All right. On that note, we will end today's live stream. Thank you to everyone that watched us on Rockfin, on Odyssey, on Rumble, and of course on YouTube and the Duran.locals.com. Thank you to our moderators, Zarael, Peter, Brett, and I think that's it for today. Moderating for today. Thank you once again to Alex. I have his information where you can follow him in the description box, and I will add it as a pinned comment as well. Alexander, let's get some videos uploaded.
Indeed, absolutely.
Right. Take care.
Goodbye,
everybody.
everybody. Yeah.